Hello and welcome back to MLQ Replay. Week 4 of the MLQ season is in the book. I think you could argue the best, or at least the most exciting weekend of the season so far. And because it's that, we finally have a three-man hosting team. Myself, Ben Mertens, and Naresh Dalla are here to break it all down. We've got some great guests as well. I'm very excited to talk about it. I feel like you guys are as well. Naresh and I were both at the Boston-New York series, and I know that Ben was watching carefully all across the country all weekend long. We're going to get right into it because there's a ton to talk about. We are going to start in the South Division, where the San Antonio Soldados kicked off their season, taking on the Houston Legends. Obviously, a lot of storylines kind of write themselves there with, Hayden Boys, who has been kind of the face of Houston Quadball for so long, starting his tenure as head coach of the San Antonio Soldados by taking on the Houston Legends. It was a very fun series. Naresh, my takeaway was that watching the Soldados play offense was just hella fun. What was your takeaway about the Soldados team? Sure. And, they did line after line after line. Considering this is a team who this weekend did not have Miguel Esparza, did not have Luis Sanchez, they were still playing three lines straight down. All of them were scoring consistently, kind of topped off by the starting line that was led by David Villa and Hayden Boyce. Ben, what did you think about the depth of this team? How deep do you think this team runs, and how does that compare historically to what we've seen in the past?
I think how deep they run is a question for MLQ champs, but in the regular season, they can play their entire 21 without much issue. They, like you said, I think actually had four kind of different groups of chasers that they ran through everybody before the first group came again. I think in the first game, that starting line that you point out with Hayden and David, which was really effective, didn't come back in for their second shift until SOP, flag runner on pitch. They played through everybody, and everyone was producing. Like you said, the Jay Stewart and Matthew Blackwood line was producing. Some of those even younger lines. This is a really young team overall, but they got production out of Riley Molman as well. I thought Isabel Ramirez was fantastic, and I believe she kind of bounced around from lines and was effective with multiple groups. So they played through the depth. It seems like they have kind of the point defender, hoop defender combos they like, and then kind of shake up the rest of the lines around that, practice with some different combinations. And they scored every single time. To Naresh and yours point about the great offense, there was not really much drop off from one line to the next in terms of scoring ability, which is why you saw the really high point totals that San Antonio got in this series. I think they'll easily be able to replicate that against Kansas City and Austin. The tough question is in semifinals and finals, do they still think they can go that deep? Do they cut it at that point? We'll have to wait until August to answer that question, I think.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned Isabel Ramirez. I believe in her MLQ debut, 7 goals, 2 assists, and a stop to her name. A really, really strong first outing. Naresh, on the other side of the ball with this Houston team, you've had a chance to kind of be around this team. And there were going to be questions about, with Boys leaving, what things were going to look like, who was going to step up. Offensively, this team stepped up. I mean, this team put up a lot of goals in this series. One name that we were already pretty hype on coming in from last season was Andrew Acosta. Who just got a DA call up as well today to his name. Who else stepped up this weekend for Houston?
extremely underrated point defender and a very, very solid offensive chaser, because typically Juan does start for Houston. Overall,
the city, I think we would have seen a 3-0 the other way, and I'm very excited to see what Houston could do once it comes down to champs. Ethan, I think
You're
you're
still
muted.
on mute, Ethan.
My bad. We talk about the things Houston's doing well, and obviously we're going to talk about the defense on both sides, I think, in a bit. But just to waylay that for people who didn't watch series as closely, these games were back and forth affairs where people were just going goal for goal for goal. Ben, in the mid-aughts of these games, how did San Antonio consistently pull away so that none of the games were truly decided at the wire when all were sent?
I think it changed game to game. So part of it was Naresh was calling out that San Antonio put up a lot of points, but League City also put up a lot of points. Part of that's because the series was a track meet, right? There's more possessions, there's more goals, and this was played at an frankly unsustainably fast pace at points in the game. So I thought in game one, San Antonio did a good job when the pace started to slow down, still being able to produce points, and League City struggled to keep up with that in a slower paced game. And then game three, I wanted to shout out specifically. That was the game that League City came closest to winning. They were up 70-50, about 12 to 14 minutes in that game. And then that was when San Antonio's beaters were like, what if we just started throwing the ball more? And that kind of very simple adjustment worked really well. They picked off some lazy passes that League City was making. Javi Tiarina made 2 beats that turned into immediate goals the other way. When Crystal Lafuente came in, was throwing at League City's beaters, but same idea, get their beaters out and then force a rush instead of just letting League City come in. And that switched to a more aggressive defense and really more aggressive beating style. Just got a bunch of easy offense for them, and that's how they put game 3 away. So it was a mix. I thought game 3 was defense and offense, whereas game 1, it was more getting control of the pace of the game, because you tend to think that the stronger team is the one that wants to play faster. That's not always true. Sometimes the stronger team is the one that wants to play slower, knows it can play both fast and slow, whereas the weaker team can only play fast. So they were wise to adjust those ways in games 1 and 3. I think game 2 was more similar to game 1 and 3, where they got the pace to slow down a little bit. They kept producing. League City struggled to produce. And that's also a depth thing, like we talked about. San Antonio played everybody. League City did a good job with their depth too, but it seemed when San Antonio got down to their 3rd and 4th line, that was more when League City was kind of coming back with part of their first line kind of mixed in with other players. And those deeper, fresher lines from San Antonio were just able to produce at the same clip. Those later lines from Houston, not quite so much.
All right, so let's talk about the defensive side. I know Naresh is less interested, so I'm going to let Ben have the lead, and Naresh can have the counter if Naresh wants it. Obviously, I think we've all been around the sport well enough to know that good defense, if not fully counters good offense, at least makes it hard on good offense. You just don't see a lot of games or a lot of series that start out like this one did with 3 goals apiece, and it didn't really slow down from there. I think San Antonio might have scored on 7 of his first 8 possessions, something like that. Houston was not far behind. Ben, what were you seeing in the X and O's from these teams? Why were the goals coming with such expediency?
So Houston, for almost all this series, was playing a trees defense. And there's 2 ways you can play trees. You can play from a position of strength or from a position of weakness, and they were mostly playing from a position of weakness, right? Strong trees is the other team is forced to come in because those shots aren't there, and then you punish them for how close they have to come in. As soon as the ball gets to a dangerous spot, either your beater makes a throw or your chaser steps out and lays a hit. And even though the other team is very close to the hoops, they don't have a great opportunity to score. League City was not really doing that. I saw way too many times where San Antonio got it to the back corner and the beater didn't throw, either because they just chose not to, or San Antonio's beaters already took them out, and the chaser just stood there with their arms up like this until the San Antonio chasers walked closer and closer and got easy goals. Secondly, if you're going to play trees, which the whole point is to take away the hoops. You have to actually be able to block the hoops. Hayden had a number of shots where he scored because of like a hammer setup play. Also several across the board for San Antonio where they scored and the hoops defender never got moved at all. They just weren't able to get in the way of the shot. Now, they don't have a ton of height on the tall hoop, but there was some on the medium hoop too where it was just lazy, arm down, bad defense, and it got past them. So San Antonio was pretty much able to score it well, but they were really committing their beaters to do that, which frankly they probably didn't need to. And that was what was opened up at the start of game one for that track meet feel, because the beaters were so committed and just throwing the dodgeballs at each other. There were a ton of plays where Houston fast broke off a San Antonio goal and either had to beat one defender or 0 defenders. And that really helped them to keep pace, which is what I was talking about before. When San Antonio was able to get better control of the pace of the game, that sucked the life out of Houston a bit, because for a while, those transition plays, Houston's got drivers, scorers, people who are going to look really, really good in transition. So that was why the games were so high scoring, I thought.
See, going off of what Ben was saying, I think it's really interesting that you brought up how committed the San Antonio Beaters were to the attack, because my biggest question coming out of this weekend is, yes, San Antonio, they look very good. They have really good ideas of what they want to do, but are their beaters going to be challenged until champs? And is the first time they're going to face a beater core that can match what they're doing, will they be getting the opportunities that they got against League City, right? Like if they have to not overcommit, but if they have to commit that hard to get that sort of goals in the half court, are we sure that a Boston is going to give those up? Are we sure that a New York is going to give those type of things up? And that's, for me, like, I think for the most part, I saw a lot of really good things. And specifically, we can talk a lot about the laziness at certain points about the San Antonio defense, whether people just not closing out right, not making the effort to get past a screen. But the thing that I really enjoyed about San Antonio this weekend was I enjoy when athletic teams just say, hey, we're athletic and we're going to blitz you. And they played fast. They took advantage of the fact that they had great beaters. They're going to press off of it. And they went on a +4 run, as Ben was talking about in game 3, when Javi just went in, was like, cool, I'm just going to throw. And that caught Houston flat-footed multiple times. And you saw, I think it's a San Antonio rookie, Theron Ratcliffe, just look stupid athletic out there. We saw a bunch of nice posters. We saw a bunch of nice dunks. But like, that's where it's, I think, defense in this sport in particular, especially when we have the half court line as a boundary now, I think more teams should just start setting up higher and forcing, because we don't see it often. And so most teams, and we saw it in Washington versus New York a couple of weeks ago, you saw Washington's beaters press New York from above the mid-pitch line, and New York was struggling where they just had to throw the ball away a couple times. So similarly, I think in this sport, when we have all the teams playing the same type of looks, there's not that much variety. So when you can push the issue, when you can push your advantage and take advantage of the fact that you have better beaters, you have more athletic beaters, you have more depth, because you can press when you have a lot more depth. That's, for me, is something that San Antonio did extremely well, defensively and just effort-wise. There are things where I do think there were points where we kind of talked about this offline, where it didn't seem like San Antonio was taking Houston too seriously, and that probably chalked it up to some of the laziness on the rotations. But it's one of those things where I think these players have all been playing at a high level for a decent bit, that I think they'll lock in once they are ready to go. But yeah, I mean, that's my personal take on like where they're at beater wise, defensively, their beater usage at all. So
yeah, I mean, that's all fair. I mean, my answer to your initial beater question about a good beater matchup is 2 words. It's Daniel Williams, who was not there this weekend and who I would argue is currently playing at the highest level of any beater in the world. And, in terms of, defense, I agree. I have no issue with the team playing, high energy pressing and saying, sometimes we're going to get a stop. It's going to be a free goal, but sometimes we're going to get a goal. I just need to see, I think on both sides, hoop defense being a little bit more than standing in front of a hoop. I mean, hoop defense is getting out and covering someone who's cutting, knowing that someone's cutting behind you, on a press, going and covering someone so that a press is successful. Things like that. That's really, my main concerns. I want to get on the interview. I just want really short answers from both of you. After seeing San Antonio for 1 week, what is your current ceiling for this team? Ben, you can go first.
They will be in the semifinals easily. They will be in the finals too. If they win the finals, a little more growth is needed between now and then. But this is a top 3, probably top 2 team in the country right now.
Naresh?
They're the number one team in the program right now. They will win MLQ champs in August. That's my take.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's get into our first interview of the night, bringing in the head coach of the San Antonio Soldados, Hayden Boys. Hayden, thanks so much for taking the time tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with for you personally, because obviously there's a lot tied up in this series for you, as we acknowledged. Having been involved in this Houston program for so many years, coaching it, being a leader on it, etc. To move the San Antonio team, take over as coach, and immediately play this team. What was that all like for you this weekend?
Man, I had a few of my past teammates in my DMs telling me how they were gonna break my bones, how they were gonna take me down, all that stuff. So that's I've never talked on a quad quips before, so that's why I decided to do it. It's because they were in my DMs. But I was actually more nervous for this series than I have been in a long time. Just for one, playing my previous team. Everybody's expecting me to go dominate them. And then just leading a whole new group of players was just really nerve-wracking, but I got over it, and I feel like we put out a pretty good product in the end.
For sure. So, we kind of talked about this team's depth, especially on the quad ball side. I mean, lines and lines of Team USA players and DA players and other players who've just been, incredibly successful in this sport for a very long time. That's a lot of people to spread the minutes around to. It's a lot of, mouths to feed. So how have you and your coaching staff kind of approached that? I mean, it seemed very egalitarian this week. Is that kind of like a general approach you guys are looking to, use as you go into the season?
I mean, I would say it's definitely a priority to let everyone that's capable to go out there and show their stuff. No one, at least to my knowledge, has said anything about, they're upset about minutes, time played. We're all kind of taking a whole team group approach. And if everyone's out there for just a few, though, the goal is as high quality reps as we can have every rep. So that's kind of the approach right now. That's the goal in the end is to run all the way through at the highest efficiency.
Yeah, and I mean, efficiency-wise, you guys are scoring at an insane clip. Given the stakes of the series and the talent of the team across the field from you, for sure. But as we were talking about, they were getting theirs too. So, going back and kind of looking back on everything, how the coaching staff kind of feel about the defensive effort from the team this weekend?
I would say every game to me felt intense. It felt like personally, I was running around everywhere, and every moment I was trying to hustle. It was mostly transition goals. It felt like we were getting cooked on a little bit. And we just kind of need to nail it in that we need to be ready for that and getting back. And when you score a goal, send it through the hoop so they don't get the easy bucket on the way back. But yeah, I would say we were working hard, but obviously there's a little bit in the transition that we were a little flustered.
So you kind of talked about the trash talk of it all with you, moving teams with your old teammates. But I mean, obviously what Houston Quadball is, it's so tied to Sam Houston State University at this point. So many of the people, come from that program. And I mean, obviously very successfully recruiting from that program. So on the other end, is it obviously there's that, but is it kind of cool to see the program continue to develop and continue to grow, and these players that you've coached for all these years, across the field from you when you're playing them?
Oh yeah, I'm super upset. I only got to play with Andrew for 1 year. I ended up moving to San Antonio, so that's what happened. But I really felt like I was like a little bit of a mentor for just that 1 year for him. But it is really cool seeing so many Sam Houston players. I'm really glad that they're the current and previous captains were able to recruit so much and really help build up the Legends post.
You've been leadership for a lot of teams that, have had success, but I wouldn't say have ever been like heavy favorites in a league per se. I mean, some of the Sam Houston teams you're on obviously are very strong college teams, but maybe not ever a heavy favorite to win a title or anything. The San Antonio team at minimum is favorites to win its division. I mean, you heard Naresh saying, number one in the country. At least all of us think y'all are finals contenders. So what's kind of the difference as a coach, bringing in a team that, has those kind of expectations versus like a young team where, you're just trying to develop and grow and, kind of get as far as you can?
Yeah, I think it's a really big focus on really figuring out what players work well together with the San Antonio roster. There's a lot of players that are really good, obviously, and just trying to figure out the best way to put them all together and different bits of like different cohesion. And versus the Legends roster, previously it was lots of development stuff, right? Hoping to get a few games here and there, hoping to scratch out a little bit to champs, and like barely missing it every year, I would say it's mostly just putting the lines together in the perfect puzzle, putting the puzzle together, and the team is obviously capable.
You mentioned kind of putting the lines in the puzzle together, and obviously this team, sources from a lot of different places, be it different clubs and different colleges. People with a lot of different ideas on, how to play offense. Like, the way I can picture exactly the way that like Jay Stewart and Alyssa Viaba want to play offense. I can picture, the way David wants to play offense, and yourself as well. So how you kind of balance, like developing an offensive system. And I think, we talked on the show about how good League City's offensive system was last season, versus kind of letting these players who are, stars in their own right kind of do the things they're most comfortable doing.
Ooh, that's a very interesting question. I mean, I feel like as you go on different lines and you have different groups, they kind of have their own style. There is a general idea of what we want to do on offense, but kind of the way they do it, the moves they make, which one is doing it from what position, it varies between lines. So it's really, you have to give them the idea and let the players decide how they're going to execute it. I'm always been one to say, like, I give my players the idea of what we want and what the best final thing is, and they make the route to it.
You kind of mentioned, giving the players the idea and letting them run with it. Naresh mentioned kind of that change at one point in the series where your beaters started throwing a little bit more and a little bit more aggressively. And I think Javier Arena specifically was kind of in one of those runs. Was that kind of the coaching staff being like, hey, let's try to like get out there a little bit more aggressively? Or was that more of like, the players just kind of feeling out the game, seeing that those opportunities were there and running with them?
We made some changes in substitutions, and it kind of changed the style of play. And obviously the previous style, we were kind of getting beat down a little bit in that moment. But yeah, it was kind of a coaching staff decision to make substitutions, but the players are the ones that really made the difference and made the decision to, change the gameplay.
So, I mean, depending on, how much film you guys have gotten around to watching, across the country, I mean, you've been able to see all the other teams that, are, amongst the favorites this season. How is the team feeling right now? What are kind of the internal expectations, and, how confident are you guys feeling, early in the season here?
I mean, the San Antonio Soldados are confident in their abilities all the time. Very, very, very high on themselves, very high on ourselves. I think the team knows that we can compete for the finals, compete for the championship. It's a matter of putting in the work and getting there. So we're doing our best. We have good practice attendance, and we're just working hard every week.
Awesome. Well, Hayden, thanks so much for taking the time with us tonight. Best of luck to you guys. We look forward to watching you guys all season, as well as championships. And I hope you have a good night.
Dude, thank you for having me.
All right, we're going to move up to the North Division now, where the Detroit Innovators and the Toronto Raiders played a very impactful series with, MLQ championship qualifications definitely on the line. In the end, it was definitely a bit of a rock fight, some low-scoring affairs, but it was Detroit who was able to pull away in all three games, lock up the sweep, and definitely an inside track to MLQ championship. Ben, kind of coming out of a series that was extremely high-scoring, we got one that was a bit more of a defensive battle. What do you think kind of defined this series compared to the other series we saw this weekend?
Nobody could score a goal, which was a mix of things, right? There was some good defense being played, but there was also passes that went awry, people trying to drive, and this goes both ways, people trying to drive through multiple defenders and not seeing where the better option was, not enough coordination between the beater and chaser games. Like these were really, really low scoring games. I think game one was like 7-5 or 8-5 when the flag runner came out. That's very low scoring for MLQ. And I thought both teams, can be proud of the defense effort they put in, but it was also both teams left a lot of meat on the bone offensively. I thought in particular, even Detroit did a better job, and this is partly why they won the series, generating transition opportunities, but they weren't even that efficient in transition. They just got a bunch of them and turned some of them into goals, but there were missed passes in transition, players shooting in transition instead of just taking it all the way to the hole. Just a lot of tough looks on offense, and then a lot of half-court possessions where it was like unclear what they were actually trying to accomplish. And part of that, again, Detroit put a lot of pressure on Toronto. Toronto's a very physical defense, which I think was stymieing some of Detroit's drivers, but just way too many kind of aimless half-court offenses, which really contributed to those super low-scoring games.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, going off of Ben's point about like the half-court and Detroit, I think 2 weeks ago when we saw this team play against, I think it was Minneapolis, there were a lot of really good ideas that I was happy about. And I think potentially maybe like roster turnover. I know I don't think Julian Toryakov was on roster this past weekend. I think that obviously impacts a lot of it. But for as many ideas that I really enjoyed against Minneapolis, I think they almost got too stale against Toronto, where when they did it one or two times, their half court, because Detroit since last year has been running a drive-in cut sort of offense where they're just drive in, find the cutter either is going to have the score or they're going to drive in themselves, cut, so on and so forth. And oftentimes it felt like there was one specific play that Toronto was gapping the ball carrier and the right option. And because they were gapping the passing option and getting into the passing lanes, I think it was Gwen Pratt just did not have the ability to pass to the right side. And then they were stuck in the well. And the beaters were playing because Toronto was also playing a top-down set where they had when they had control, they had the beater playing up top and then a beater playing in the back, and so they just had no passing options. So my concern / potentially things that I'm looking forward to seeing from Detroit is very much going to be how do you build off of the baseline that you have, because you have a very decent, good baseline. Let's expound on that. Let's build on the type of skills that you can add to your kit bag. So that way you're not just relying on one thing. Now, if the defense adjusts to what you can do, how are you going to adjust to that? And I think that's the thing that if Detroit can figure out, again, they've essentially clinched their way into champs at this point. Mathematically, I would assume. So I think now it's just the rest of the season is building their way towards building an identity that's beyond just what they have right now, because I think there is a ceiling with where they're at. And if they can break those habits of just always looking for one thing, I think that's when they'll start getting these easier looks. They'll start getting better and easy. Just let me slow down. They'll get easier looks, and beyond just the hammers that they run, they'll be able to get more consistent scores.
Yeah, and I mean, to their credit, Lucas Marklin, who is kind of their target person on a lot of those cuts, did have 9 goals to their name in this series. So they did get theirs. But like you said, Toronto, I think a combination of Toronto being a physical team that kind of cuts down some of those drives that free up those cuts, with some misexecutions, kind of the mix. You mentioned no Julian Toryakov this weekend. I believe it was on the TBI podcast where they really wanted an Ashton Glenn step up. Ashton, I think, the stats bear out, the step up. But Ben, what did you see from Glenn this weekend?
All right, first of all, go back to Lucas Marklin. 9 goals, 0 assists, 0 turnovers. That is the pure Hooper stat line. No passing, no turnovers, put the ball through the hoop. That's how it's done. Ashton, 6 goals, 7 assists, 5 turnovers. I try not to get too caught up in the stats because there's a lot more that goes in that. There can be a good look that you create and your teammate doesn't finish it. A turnover can sometimes be you were trying to create something out of a bad situation. I thought what was important was they looked pretty confident at the controls of the offense. Toronto, as we said, very physical team. They gave Cleveland some problems in that series. They gave Detroit problems at points in this series. But confidence, I think, is the biggest thing for someone who has to step into a role that's been bigger than what they've had to play in the past due to absences on the roster. And like Naresh said, still a relatively young season for Detroit. They have 2 more series to play before they get the championships. They have not mathematically clinched, but they have probably clinched because of this sweep. and they still have to play, the two toughest team, Cleveland, which is a winnable series, and then the toughest team in the division in Chicago. So I think we need to see what Ashton can do. I'm especially excited to see against Chicago, who's going to be a step up defensively from Toronto. But I think this is, for what they had to do in the series, they got the sweep. Ashton was a big part of that, so that's good to see.
Yeah. Naresh, I think I might have been the one who said a couple weeks ago that I'd seen enough of, Julian Toyarkov, the beater, after that first series. Looking at, at the analytics, and I want to shout out Josh Mansfield, who has put in these new beater pair analytics into the MLQ stats. If you haven't seen them, they are absolutely awesome. They basically rank the efficiency of all the beater pairs for a team in a series and on the season comparative to each other, not even like how they're performing, but how their performance are comparative to each other. In this series, the only positive performing beater pairs were beater pairs that Ryan Sue was in. Obviously, Julian Toyarkov not available. It seems like this team needs a second engage beater. It seems like they have not cracked that code. Naresh, how hard do you think that kind of caps their top end?
Yeah, I mean, this is where we were talking about with San Antonio just a few minutes ago. They can adjust. They can do whatever they want because they had so much depth, right? One line was going to hit you in transition. Another line might hit you in half court. Another line might just press. Versus when you are limited with your ability to adjust, now you're asking the same players. Like we've seen Ryan and Ray play monster minutes for this team because of necessity. And that limits what you can do because you're going to be able to press 35 plus minutes every game or whatever, right? So I think that's where having Julian, regardless of how we feel about the effectiveness or regardless of the effectiveness, I think the impact that Julian beating has is very important. And that one gives Ryan and Ray a break, but also Julian is athletic enough and he has fun with it where I think he will be able to get away with some of these matchups that, again, in Cleveland, they still have to play Cleveland. That is a series that I think they should not be taking lightly because Cleveland has shown that they can play and punch up to anyone. So I think that is a series where they're going to need a second beater pair, second beater, engage beater, be able to just take that onus off of Ryan. And I think that's where Julian can step up because this team has the offensive firepower without Julian to handle themselves, but they do need to fluctuate the minutes so that it's not just the same beaters out there, and eventually they just get tired and not as effective.
That's not new for Detroit. Last year, the Fast Break News preview article had a whole paragraph about how in the series that David Bannis didn't show up to, Detroit was less effective. And people made fun of that article because David Bannis wrote it himself. But his point wasn't, I'm really good. His point was, we don't have a strong second beater behind Ryan and Ray. So it's not a new issue for them. It's a known thing. And that's going to kind of determine how they can do the rest of this season.
Yeah, and I know Ben doesn't want to get lost in the stats, but Ryan played 30 drives this weekend. His team scored 20 times in those drives. They allowed 3 goals, and he had 1.9 dodgeballs on average during that time. Pretty absurd stats. But on the Toronto side, obviously, it's going to be an uphill battle for them to keep their qualification streak that they've had since they formed for MLQ Championship. But if you're looking for some bright things to take away for this team, where do you think this team can turn?
There's 2 things. So on defense, they can still hang their hat on the physicality. That gave Cleveland problems. It gave Detroit problems. It can give Minneapolis and Chicago problems down the line. They're up and down the roster, I think, even when they cycle through their lines, physical up and down. The second thing is, in terms of improvements, I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit this team can still eat, right? When Ryan was blowing up and pressing them, I remember there was a play where I think it was Rousseau handling the ball, just threw it behind the hoops, which is okay to prevent the fast break, but he had someone on the other side Melchior, I think, who we could just swung it to. And Ray, as an extra shot earlier, was standing behind the hoops, just reading where that second beater is. There is room to pass around these presses, and if they can get more experience with that and more skill with that, they'll be able to counter these presses way more effectively, and then they'll actually be able to play offense, because I think their biggest problem in this series is so many possessions didn't even end with like a shot on goal. If you're getting good shots and you just miss them, it's bad luck. But the process in this series wasn't even really leading to a lot of shots or good opportunities, right? So there's low-hanging fruit that this team can eat, and if they can pick that up in practice the next few weeks, there's hope for this team still, because they have a strong defense. If you have a strong defense, you can make things happen, but they have to find a way in the half court to actually generate some points.
Yeah, I'm gonna bounce off of that. Where Ben, I agree with most of what you said, but I think maybe I'm just being a tad more positive about this. Think about the critiques that we had for Toronto a couple weeks ago. We said their offense was running through one person, and that became an offensive black hole. One of the key positives that I took away from this series was in just 2 weeks, we saw a Toronto offense almost flip the script where I saw a lot more people touching the ball on offense.
For sure.
I saw a pointed effort to get the ball away from Melchior and actually get more people involved. And so to your point of like, yes, a good offense is one where you can at least get a good shot off. Agreed there, but I do think from where this team was at a couple of weeks ago, the fact that they're making these strides to get better as a cohesive unit is only going to serve them better. And I think the process is good in that they're making these efforts. And as they continue to do it, I think then we'll start getting cleaner looks and better opportunities to score because they had a lot of really good ideas of, hey, like let's move the ball to the well, draw the defense towards me, and then kick it out to the opposite side. The problem was their positioning might not have been great. That's fixable, right? Those are things that we can work on. Those are things that we can rep out. So that's the sort of thing that the fact that the critiques that we had 2 weeks ago were already addressed, that for me leads me to believe that this team is not out of it. They are probably very upset with how the national media is talking about them, and I think they're going to continue to get better the next couple of months, regardless of how champs goes. I think for them, it's let's get better as a program because we've talked about it offline. This really feels like the year where the young players are really coming in. And for Toronto, they have quite a few players that are coming in that are newer to this program that I think even if this year is not the year to win and go as far as you can, give them the time this year to develop into what the program can be next summer or the year after that, so on and so forth.
Yeah, they're on the right track. I agree with you on that. It's a race against time at this point in the season, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, in fairness, we kind of said that, Detroit's kind of turning over some in the beater core. Like they need to find something behind Ryan. I mean, Derek Taylor's been with this Toronto team, on and off for a very long time at this point. The numbers weren't that bad this weekend, and they play a lot of minutes. And they're kind of figuring out, who's playing number twos, number threes, and kind of getting that going in the same way that a team like Detroit is. We're just maybe not as familiar with all the names. But also, Detroit was, playing Levi Medeiros at beater. It's a player that came from that Toronto program. So, everything's, kind of overlapping. It's a lot of teams going through rebuilds, and it's not just American teams doing it. It's good to see that Canadian teams are doing it as well. You mentioned, getting the ball a little more out of Melchior's hands. Wanless was their leader scorer this weekend with 6 goals. So, like you guys said, making some adjustments is very good to see. Speaking of those adjustments, we're going to talk to the head coach of the Toronto Raiders, Sinan Kader. Sinan, thanks so much for taking the time tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Definitely surprised to be invited as the losing coach, but always happy to be part of the show. Yeah.
Well, we wanted to catch up with you guys. You guys are halfway through your season at this point. And obviously, like we said, maybe not going exactly the way we want to go, but we're looking for the positives and the negatives at all times. So, kind of talk to me about, where the Raiders program is, because a lot of times, as we talk about, the American media doesn't know, every, new player coming into a program. So what's kind of, are you guys kind of at a rebuilding stage with, some veterans, but a lot of youth coming in, or kind of where do you see the program at right now this season?
Yeah, we're definitely part of the whole rebuilding stage that started last year. 2 years ago, 2023, we had a very good run all the way to the quarterfinals. And that also being the World Cup year, we had a lot of retirements and a lot of key retirements as well. So, I mean, just ask the 2 teams that beat us, Cleveland and Detroit, that rebuilding doesn't happen just over a season. It's a long process. And a lot of our rookies last year were also not only rookies to the league, they were also rookies to the game as well. So even though we have a lot of returners, everyone's taken on new roles within the team. So yeah, the rebuilding process is definitely underway, and we're focused on the next season. And like you guys also mentioned, we did clean up our act from the Canadian series, but we have a lot more cleaning up to do.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, obviously the division's gotten tougher as well with some of these rebuilds getting later in their process, be it a Detroit or a Cleveland. So, you guys obviously started your season with that Cleveland series, a team you've, historically handled. But, that as we talked about, you've seen the growth, year in, year out. So did the level they were at kind of take you guys by surprise at all? Or did you kind of come into that series kind of really expecting the level of fight that you got?
It did take us a little bit by surprise, not a lot. We were expecting it to be a lot tougher of a series, especially with the much bigger roster that they have and a lot more, a couple of returners to their roster. Not sure if everyone on our team thought of it that way, but the coaching staff were definitely aware that was going to be a tougher series than usual. And Cleveland at home is always a lot harder. Like even 2023, I believe 2 years ago, we had another close call with them there. But yeah, I feel like they have a lot more. They play with each other a lot more. That's the advantage, the biggest advantage they had over us. They had a lot more chemistry. They had a lot more time together.
For sure. You're mentioning adjustments, and Naresh talked a lot about that as well, week to week. Obviously, you don't get the results this weekend, but are you happy with the adjustments and the improvements the team have made from Series 1 this year to Series?
Oh, 100%. Yes. That's one of the first things I told the team as well after the game. I mean, I would rather not lose, of course, but if I were to lose, I would rather lose this way than the way we lost to Cleveland. We shared the ball a lot more. We tried executing a lot of the offenses that we practiced in practice, not to 100% success. Some of them failed because of the adjustments Detroit made on defense. Some of them failed because of our execution was not 100%. But still, we were trying stuff. We were getting the defense moving. We were opening up opportunities. Also, our defense was a lot better too. We lost the first 2 games, I believe, by 85. Have that catch go against us, go our way, and we're only down 20, and we're very much in those games as well. So yeah, I'm very happy with our performance this weekend.
Talk to me about kind of the unique structure of Toronto Raiders during a World Cup season, because really, I would say almost none, if not none at all. Seeing your US MLQ team has as many people going to a national team, as Toronto often does. So what do those kind of World Cup seasons look like? Obviously, you don't want to say people's minds are in 2 places, but there's a lot going on all in one summer. So kind of how has that been handled in, 2023 and obviously now with you coaching the team in 2025?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I feel like you can clearly see the level of how locked in some of the World Cup players are. Ottawa has something similar. They don't have as much exposure to the rest of the league this year because of not being able to travel. We try to always work together as one Canada. We try to sometimes we try to sometimes like mesh like either series with some Team Canada practices, or like Ottawa and Toronto players sometimes try to practice together. We try to follow similar kinds of players or kind of mentalities within Team Canada and the Raiders as well. So yeah, those practices are always complementary.
That's awesome. And obviously another kind of unique thing for you guys is that, our 2 metagames are basically fully insular for 8-9 months a year. And then you guys kind of experience the American metagame for, 3-4 months a year. So what's kind of that process like? Like, are you guys as a coaching staff often trying to, keep up with like USQ Cup tape to make sure, like kind of what the American teams are looking at coming into a season, or how do you guys kind of handle that as kind of reintroducing yourself each year to kind of the American metagame?
Yeah, we all like watching the USQ Cups. Always, we do like socials of watching them together. With the new rules with USQ and QC, we have a couple players playing over in the USQ league, or like some American players playing in the Canadian league as well. But yeah, we do definitely have to focus on our own league, and we have a completely different structure. We don't have the club college split, so that's always a fun little unique way of the way we run things here. So
I would hope if we're doing our job as the media that some of the bigger names that have been, key parts of this franchise for a number of years, the Melchiors of the world, do have, name recognition in the States. But talk to me about some of the younger players on this team that you're very excited about the way they're developing this year and you think might be a big part of the future of this program, in the years to come.
Yeah, one person that I can definitely highlight is Izzy Kirby. She was recruited as one of the assistant coaches this year, and she's doing very, very well in both her coaching and her mentoring younger players. And Maddie Macheski is another one that I can highlight that she's stepping up really well, even though it's her second year. I believe in the sport as well, but also second year in MLQ2. So not quite a veteran player, not compared to some of the other players that have 8-10 years of experience, but she's definitely one of the leaders that she's definitely playing a lot, with a level head that you would expect from a veteran of 8-10 years. And they're also helping out some of the younger players too, and they're showing up. That's, I believe, one of the more important aspects of it. They're present always. They're in practices. They're in games. They're engaging always.
Awesome. So obviously you guys kind of have the World Cup break, and then you have a very tough Super Series ahead of yourself. I think it's one of the first times that Chicago and Minneapolis have been in a Super Series together. But also, kind of gives you a unique opportunity where they obviously also have a lot of focus on the series they're going to be playing against each other, but also have to, keep up that focus for the games against you guys. How are you guys feeling as you go into that back end and that big all-in-one culmination of your season?
Yeah, it's exciting because it's I believe the first time the Raiders have been a part of Super Series as well. We always had North Champs, or we were not part of a Super Series. So definitely going to be a fun experience, and to see two of the top 5 teams in the league go against each other is going to be really, really fun. And we're going to look to like you guys said, clean up our act a little bit more. Develop ourselves for prepare for the next season, and hopefully cause an upset and caught one of the teams sleeping.
Awesome. Well, we hope you do that because we like nothing more than an upset. Sian, thanks so much for taking the time tonight. It was great to learn a little bit more about the Raiders franchise. Best of luck with the rest of your season.
Thank you guys.
All right. Well, we have one more series to talk about tonight. We had 2, tasty appetizers, but I definitely think the series has been kind of the main course maybe of the season so far. Boston, New York in our series of the week. It came down to game 3. You could argue the division came down to that game 3, though. I think the Admirals would still like to have something to say about that later in July against Boston. We can talk about that in a bit. But in the end, the New York Titans are defending champions, do take the series 2-1. They do put themselves in basically very comfortable position to clinch the division. They really have to have things go awry for them against Charlotte in a few weeks. Let's start with, let's start on the Boston side, because I think most people didn't see this series being as competitive as it was. Ben, if you had to start with one place in Boston on why this series was as close as it was, where would you start?
Well, the easiest coaching adjustment that coaches forget to make is just to play your best players more. And Coach Kieran Collier did not forget to make that adjustment. He spammed the Max Havlin, and they spammed the Max Havlin and Lulu Zubin. Max and Lulu were excellent. I think they were -3 ± in a series that the team lost by 10 or 12 goals, something like that. So very positive. In game 2, Max, I think, played the first 12 minutes of the series or of the game or something like that. In those minutes, Boston was really effective, even with this very young chaser core. Something we talked about against Charlotte was that the young chasers were kind of struggling to finish plays. Max made it as easy as he possibly could for them, and they really stepped up as well. So the big overarching picture is definitely how well Max and Lulu, who have been this good for 10 years, continue to be. But I thought we should shout out Boston's young chasers as well, who really stepped up.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to them. I think all the credit in the world to Kieran Collier. They pushed all of the right buttons in this series, I thought. As Ben said, a lot of people aren't willing to, push and play your best players when you have that opportunity, when the chance to win a division suddenly, falls on your plate. And they were willing to take it. I think, in some of those bridging positions, they got, some big minutes out of a Foot Gunner, especially in game 2. That kind of kept things closer. But yeah, when they weren't on the field, I think it was 17 drives, I said, and the team was -7. But but they managed to keep Havlin and Shu, at least one of them, on the field at all times. They got contributions from partners, and it made it a series. Naresh, on the other side, though, I mean, all that said, New York's got plenty of beating talent as well, and I think most of us saw a likely quadball edge, despite all that. Even if you're going to say that Havlin and Shu were going to give the New York core a run for their money. Ben, I believe, when talking about the North Series, kind of chuckled at the fact that 7-5 was a really low 20 minutes. I believe game 2 of the series was 5-5 at 20 minutes.
Yeah.
What was going wrong on the offensive end for New York?
So I don't say this lightly because I work for the federal government. And in theory, a lot of people say, hey, federal workers have a lot of job security. I wish I had the job security that some of these New York starters have had. That was embarrassing to watch. These are players that have been playing together for years now, and they can't run a half court. What are we doing here, right? There were multiple points. I think one, there's just so many things that just baffled me about this weekend. Why is the starting line for New York playing close to 9 minutes when Boston's made multiple chaser subs? Boston was on their second and a half, third chaser subs, while New York was still running their starting line when they've only put up 2 goals in game 1. In game, I think the time was Leo scores in transition at 4:15 game 1. They don't score again for 11 minutes. And then I went back last night to watch all 3 games, and I was tracking it, and I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they scored 8 goals over the course of 3 games. The New York starters scored 8 goals over the course of 3 games, and that was 25 minutes and 39 minutes. And one of those was a Hail Mary shot by Lindsay, right? Like, what are we like that? That's not sustainable. That is not how offense should be. And I think a large part of their difficulties was the sheer fact that you and Yada were talking about it on commentary. It's a straight fact that some of these players just don't know how to take space. They don't know how to take space. They don't know how to cut. And you're not going to win one-on-one matchups against players that can match your athleticism. And that's exactly what we saw. We saw Carson Olazaba, Andrew Steinberg play elite point defense. We saw Luisa Nikolai step up at hoops and make monster stuffs. We saw all of these players be able to match what the New York Chasers were trying to do. And when they took away that, hey, we can match your athleticism, what else do you have? They really didn't have anything. And I really am shocked at how much these starters were given the rope, because I think when you have Shakti Kodeswaran as a chaser not get any minutes this entire series, that's embarrassing. Shakti is a phenomenal player. He's a DA player. He's played for this team last year, got minutes, scored the game-winning goal in one of the MLQ Champs finals series. So, like, if he's not getting minutes, what are we talking about? If Ryan Leary, who started minutes for this team last year, is not getting played the entire 3 games, what are we talking about, right? It's not a sustainable model. And this is a criticism that New York has received for years now, where the same players keep playing the same amount of minutes. And then finally during champs, when those young players go in, they mess up. Now everyone's like, oh, like we just had to play the starters all the time. It's unsustainable. It's unfortunate. And I think this team really needs a gut check in terms of who is being given a ton of minutes on the field. Similarly, I'm going on a rant. I apologize, but I was just sitting there just fuming. Why are the beaters playing 7-minute shifts? It makes no sense. Why is Devin Lee the last couple of years? I've seen Devin since I was a freshman in college. Devin works best when he's let's cook it right now. All right. Devin works best when he's operating in quick 2-minute shifts. Why is he running? I think it was hold up. I wrote this down. Where is he at? Devin has played close to 7+ minutes in multiple shifts. That's not his game. Devin is super explosive. He can come out and just dominate and then just leave. He's a whirlwind of energy. He playing that many minutes is just not using him to his maximum capability. And I think there was just so many different things where the same players, as you said, like some coaches really want to press the pedal on the gas when they know they can win. I think New York needs to take the foot off the gas and just really trust the rest of their team, because they have super talented players. and they really have the ability to dominate, similar to the way that we talked about with San Antonio. They have the ability to do that, but they need to get away from just running these players into the ground, because you're not going to get the same level of effectiveness that you would from minutes 1 to 3 that you are from minutes like 6, 7, 8, because it's just not effective. It's a high-paced game, and it's just not great. I apologize. That was a lot.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think I agree with some things you're saying. But I think the most interesting thing is simply that if a line's not scoring, I don't know why you keep a line in. That's the part that's ultimately the most shocking to me. I mean, we talked about a lot of levers being pulled perfectly by Collier. You could say a little bit less to that from the New York staff. I mean, every single game Boston was up 3-2, and I think all those 3-2s were either either the first line already left like 12 minutes in, or first line was still on the field. I think if we want to be optimistic, because New York did win this series, I think what did start clicking for New York offensively was when Byron stepped onto the field. And I think if we want to talk about what the New York first line was, I don't know if there was a true ball carrier on that line. I mean,
there were some difficult passes, right? I was complaining about how static the zone defenses were in the San Antonio Houston series. Boston plays a much more aggressive zone where they know where those cutters are going to be. And Byron was still able to thread the needle. That's a really tough skill. And Byron was also able to create one-on-one, which is the thing that they're lacking, that they're so used to John Jackson being able to do. And even Michael Parada being able to do. Neither of those players were here this weekend. Yada's not on the team. John wasn't there this weekend, so they needed someone else to do it. Byron could do that. He could actually hit the lane in a way that, I should say hit the lane and make the right decision, because I think one of the problems on the first line is players hitting the lane and just making the wrong decision, like shooting when the pass was the better option, passing when the shot was the better option. Byron just calibrated better, and that's like a really hard thing to do, so it's very impressive for a younger player to kind of step in and look like the veteran as compared to that first line of players who are a lot older than Byron.
Yeah, and it kind of felt like they kind of went through 3 layers. The first layer, it was, all of that kind of younger Rutgers core, Morel on the field as well, but with Cam and Javid and Byron, and it cooked. And then the second game, it seemed like Boston kind of keyed in on just like kind of shutting down Cole's cuts, and it didn't work as well. And the third game, they said, we'll just throw Leo Fried out there with Byron, and they're not going to stop Leo Fried's cuts no matter what they do. And Byron just started picking them out, and that's kind of how they got through game 3. But yeah, I mean, it definitely felt like the offense was clicking most when he was on the field. But ultimately, we didn't see that many of their quad ball players, so we don't know what other things might have clicked. On the Boston side, I think there were kind of some stumbles with ball handling at times as well. I thought Athena Mayer had a very good series, and Ethan Dillon did, but it felt like when they weren't on the field, Boston kind of had the same issues that New York's first line was saying. Naresh, you're not. I'll let you take this one when it comes to the Boston offense.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things. I think it was game 1. We saw Athena Mayer step up multiple times, just drive into space, shoot, dunk. These were things that if you're going to give the space, just take it until the defense is forced to react to you. If they don't react to you, just keep going and score. And I think we saw Athena do that extremely well. We saw when I think Carson is a very underrated player in this Boston team. He doesn't get talked about as much for his offensive capabilities. There were multiple times where he saved possessions just because of his hustle and his ability to be in the right space when New York was pressing against Boston. And I think that was very solid. But I think y'all were talking about it in the commentary. Outside of Athena, outside of maybe Carson as well, and Ethan, who is that next step, right? And there were a couple moments where Luisa Nicolai stepped up and did the same thing that Athena was doing. We saw the same thing from Sammy Magner a couple times. Very exciting from her as well. We saw Steinberg really hold the ball a lot, but I think that's where it started to falter a bit, where Steinberg is at his best when he's an off-ball chaser. The dude's a very good off-ball cutter. We saw it at Harvard with him and Leo and Anna Blanchfield. We saw it with what team was DCQC this past season. He is very solid when he's playing off-ball. On ball, he can do it, but it's one of those things where you want him off ball. And I think that's where, similar to New York, you have a lot of these players stepping into these roles that they might not be as comfortable with. And I think you definitely saw the fall off. But considering the expectations for both teams, it's one of those things where I'm willing to give this super young team that's willing to play 19-year-olds with Zach Donofrio coming out and scoring multiple goals on transition, giving them that energy. Like, yeah, they weren't scoring a lot in the half court when the starters weren't in, but they were still getting high energy plays because they were playing through their roster. And the fact that that was what they were willing to do, I'm willing to give them a pass versus players that have been playing for a decent amount of time. It's almost inexcusable that we can't run a consistent half court. And I think for me, that's where I come off more critical against New York versus Boston. I'm like, yeah, if y'all are doing this now, I can't even imagine what you're doing in a couple months from now when you get Kieran back, right? These are the things that excite me about what Boston was able to do this past weekend. And the adjustments that they need to make, those are all adjustments that I think they can make. They've shown that they have players that recognize and do these things. And I think that will translate to these younger players. And I just really wanted to say this. Shout out to Ufuk Gunnar. Shout out to Ufuk Gunnar, because in game 2, there was a point where I was sitting there and I'm like, that's a mini Max Havlin right now. And it just really felt like, for those who don't watch Naruto, this might not make sense. But there was a point where it felt like I was Kakashi watching Naruto with the silhouette of Minato in the background. I was like, oh, this is brilliant. But no, like Ufuk really stepped up, I think, in that second game and really gave them the minutes to really equalize, if not outplay, Devin Lee and Tessa and Devin Lee and Rachel. And I think that's where just cycling through these beaters and staggering their minutes has really helped Boston. And it's only going to be better once Kieran gets back. And it's just so much fun to watch.
Yeah, we've gone too far into an MLQ replay and we're past the hour mark when we've got the nerd references coming in. But yeah, I mean, I think all your points are well founded, and you mentioned the contributions of some of the young college players on this Boston team. Obviously, the biggest contribution in game 2 at the end came in kind of a perfectly shot moment where Stephen Tremple came running across the field, subbing in, and just in one move made the catch that sealed that win. That said, in the other 2 games, and in fairness, New York slightly ahead in both of them, it was a lot of TK and Tessa Chico dominating around the flag runner, and of course Mohagog delivering grabs. One of the things that makes New York a little bit more upset proof, is that they still have Hagag sitting at the end, and Hagag, if not automatic, has been so successful for so many big programs and so many big moments at this point. So with all that said, Ben, how much does this series change your impressions on either of these teams?
Changes my impression of Boston a lot. New York, right, we've been ragging on for 10 minutes. They won the series 2-1. They won the series 2-1 last year, too, when Boston took a game off them, and they ended up stomping everybody at championships. So they have time to clean it up. And then for Boston, though, they played phenomenally, and we've been talking for 10 minutes about Kieran Collier. They coached such a great series. Max and Lulu, they played so great. These young players like Donofrio really stepped up. So, why did they lose the series? The biggest difference is that Boston made unforced turnovers. New York had plenty of turnovers in the series, but they came either from Boston pressure or, like we were talking about, New York's ball handlers hit the lane and made the wrong decision. Boston had 5 to 10 plays that were just unforced turnovers. They thought there was a fast break and it wasn't, and then there was nobody to pass the ball back to, so they turned over. Bad pass that bounces off of somebody's hands or gets dropped or whatever. If they can clean that stuff up, and with young players, that's the exciting thing. In a month and a half, they can actually get a lot of work done and a lot of improvement done. If they can clean that up, they might be able to steal this series instead of just steal one game of it, right? That was the huge difference. And then secondly, as Naresh alluded to, Kieran might still play this season. And the thing Boston was missing, Ufuk looked really good in their minutes. But it seemed like when Max and Lou were not on the field, it wasn't the same team. We've seen Kieran play at that same level against top-tier opponents. If Kieran can come back as a player, that's going to change Boston's whole ceiling, and I think put them into real finals contention. So I'm really excited for Boston. This was a huge step forward, way better performance than what we saw against Charlotte. And I think maybe we were guilty of not, against Charlotte, realizing that was Boston just playing down to the level of their opponent rather than this sign that they were not the same program. This is still the same program. This is a real contender, and they have 6 weeks to keep getting better, and that's really exciting for a team that's really relying on youth.
Yeah, you mentioned the unforced errors that show up in the – I'll get to you in a second, Nourish, that show up on the stat sheet like turnovers. There are definitely some unforced defensive errors too. We talked about the 2 Lindsey Morello Hail Marys. Ultimately – insane shots, but neither one probably should have ended up going through a hoop undefended. A couple other presses where just not enough people were covered. Obviously, a top team like New York is going to do everything they can to kill a press, and Boston did let them kill some of those presses. Ultimately, the series was probably decided at that point, but in game 3 after the catch, where Havlin had already taken off to start running the offense, and then they just never fell on the loose ball. and then they threw an alley-oop to Leo Fried. So yeah, I think that's fair, and that's one thing. As much as we talk about kind of maybe like the boring lifelessness at times in the New York offense, it's always going to be clean when all is said and done.
Yeah.
Naresh, what are your opinions on? Was your opinion change on either of these teams this weekend?
No, I mean, it's similar to what Ben was saying. Like, we saw the same thing. I had a lot of these same critiques of New York last summer. I might not have been as public with it, but I had the same critiques of New York. And we saw what they did at Champs. But I think the personnel is not the same. And unless they can figure out the answer, I don't know if they will get the same results that they saw at Champs last year. Having said all that, though, I still think that they are semifinals, finals. Like, I would be shocked if they weren't in the finals, because at the end of the day, their sheer athleticism, they have talent, depth, just galore. And I think going back to, and the reason why I wanted to talk about it was, Ben, you talked about how, they still, at the end of the day, they still won 2-1. But the reason why I'm like maybe more down on New York and obviously a lot higher on Boston now is the sheer fact that none of these games were ever like clear blowouts in the by 20 minutes. They were always within, they were either tied, which was game 2. I think game 1, it was like a 2-point game, 3-point game. And by game 3, it was a 3-point game, which they cut down. They could have cut down to 2-point. And I think, Ethan, you and I have always been on the same page that first 20 minutes is something you can control extremely well. And that's something that I think they showed that they can play against pretty much the highest level team in the division. And that, for me, has Boston clearly as a top 4 team this summer, which I might not have had maybe a couple months ago or a couple weeks ago. But now I do think Boston is a semifinals team for sure. Depending on how it goes and how they continue to develop, they are in line for a upset dark horse type thing outside of the top 3 teams. New York, again, it's one of those things. They didn't have John Jackson, and he is his own offensive system, and I think it's going to work when he gets played with the starters. I don't know that his style of offense can be replicated by the rest of the program. Historically, that's what the attempt has always been, to try to replicate what John does. I think they need to continue to follow what showed that it can work, which is cutting into space and finding those open spaces, finding those open passes, finding the positions of maximum efficiency and opportunity. But those are the things that I think if they continue to build on, they have so much talent, they have so much athleticism that this team can really put together a very fun. I'm all about fun. I want fun quad ball. I want track meets. I want this. And I think New York could really do that. And if they do that at Champs or in the next couple of months or whatever, they show up at Champs and that's what they do, would I be surprised? Not really. This team is probably the most talented, probably the most they have so much talent on this team. And so if that happens, would not be surprised. But right now, I came into this weekend thinking New York was 1, probably, like I was thinking 1. Now I think they're 2, maybe 3, probably 3. But so that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
One small thing with New York too, like for their ceiling, sometimes you just have a bad day. And we've seen Tate, Tessa, and Devin play way better against Max in the past and Lulu in the past than they did this weekend. So they might just have a better weekend at Champs, and that would meaningfully change their ceiling if their beaters had just like played better, right?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned, changes in the, New York personnel, but I mean, I also would argue that, kind of bring it all back together, that the San Antonio team and the Chicago team are maybe both stronger than any team that existed last year. Obviously, Chicago didn't have Matt Brown last year, and the San Antonio team is way more loaded than last year's San Antonio team. But yeah, and I think the interesting thing about Boston is Boston just kind of did a little audition for Chicago on why Chicago might not want to pick them to be the team they have to play in the quarterfinals. You mentioned Boston possibly being a semifinal team. The easiest way to finish second in your division and make the semifinals is to not be the team that gets picked by the first place team from another division. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. But that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks to everyone who stuck around. We know we went a little bit long tonight, but obviously a lot to talk about. Quieter week coming up this coming week, and then myself and Ben will be here to break it all down before we break for the World Cup. But yeah, thanks for everyone for listening. Thank you to our guests. Thanks to Ben and Naresh for joining. For myself, for all of MLQ, we thank you for watching, We hope to see you at the games this weekend, and we'll talk to you next week.